Once upon a time, in a village nestled between a wind-swept cliff and a restless sea, lived a young woman named Lila. She had hair the color of spun seaweed and eyes that mirrored the ocean's ever-changing moods. For as long as she could remember, Lila had been drawing pictures of ships in her worn leather journal, dreaming of faraway lands and the adventures that awaited her beyond the horizon. But despite her wanderlust, Lila was afraid to leave the only home she'd ever known. The thought of venturing out into the vast unknown filled her with a paralyzing fear. You see, Lila's father had been a fisherman who'd vanished at sea years ago. All she had left from him was a compass and a cryptic message: follow the wind. The villagers, though, scoffed at the idea of following the wind. They were practical folk who relied on the steadfastness of the sea for their livelihood. To them, the wind was nothing but a nuisance, a force to be reckoned with, and certainly not something to follow. One day, a storm as wild and unpredictable as Lila's own heart began to brew on the horizon. The waves crashed against the shore with increasing ferocity, whipping the sea into a frenzy. As the wind howled through the village, the old villagers gathered together, their faces etched with worrying. "The storm is growing stronger by the hour," one exclaimed, his voice barely audible above the wind's mournful cry. "If the beacon atop the wind-swept cliff isn't lit, the ships at sea won't stand a chance." The beacon, an ancient monument that had guided sailors for generations, was normally tended by the village elder. But he was too frail to climb the treacherous cliff in such a violent storm. And so they turned to Lila, their eyes pleading for help. "Please, child," they begged, their voices trembling with desperation, "you must light the beacon." But Lila's heart pounded in her chest, threatening to burst out of her ribs. I can't," she stammered, clutching her journal close as if it were a shield. The wind seemed to mock her, whispering through the village, "You're not brave enough, Lila. You never will be." Tears streamed down Lila's face, blurring the images in her journal. She wanted to help her village, to be the hero they needed, but fear held her back, anchoring her to the shore. An old sailor named Mara, her face weathered and lined like an old sailor's should be, stepped forward. Her eyes, though, were as sharp and clear as the sea on a windless day. "The wind doesn't wait for courage," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "It carries you. Step forward, child, and let the wind be your guide." Taking a deep breath, Lila nodded, surprised by the sudden surge of determination that coursed through her veins. With her journal tucked under her arm, she started her ascent up the wind-swept cliff. The wind tore at her cloak, trying to pull her back to the safety of the village. But with each step, Lila felt her fear recede, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. Reaching the top of the cliff, Lila stumbled out of breath, just as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky with hues of gold and crimson. The wind whipped around her, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the distant cry of gulls. Fear threatened to overwhelm her again, but she shook it off, focusing instead on the flickering flame she had just ignited atop the beacon. As the storm raged around her, the beacon burned brightly, a steadfast flame that pierced the darkness. With a deep sense of satisfaction, Lila watched as the first ships began to appear on the horizon, their sails billowing in the wind, guided safely by the beacon's light. When the storm finally began to subside and the sun broke through the clouds, the wind seemed to carry her father's voice, faint yet somehow comforting. It echoed through her very being, urging her to follow its call. Turning towards the sea, Lila smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. With her father's compass in hand and her journal filled with dreams, she was ready to chase the horizon, no longer afraid of the wind, but embracing it as the very force that would carry her to new adventures. And so, with a newfound courage that bloomed in her chest, Lila stepped onto a waiting ship and set sail for uncharted waters, bidding farewell to the only life she'd ever known.